Hey there YouTube, this is Jane, and this video starts with a package and ends with a gouache illustration. So it's a bit unprecedented maybe on my channel to make a gouache painting, but I'm gonna explain what led me to change my mediums for a little bit and try out something new. So I received this package from a company called Magicfly about 2 months ago. I communicated with them last in January. They were kind enough to contact me and ask me if I want to try out this product. According to their website, they produce several types of paint, including watercolors and gouache, but the watercolors were not in stock at that particular time, so they sent over the gouache. And I didn't mind because I always wanted to try out gouache painting. I do consider myself a gouache beginner still, even though I did paint at least 20 paintings with gouache, but I didn't experiment with it a whole bunch, did not explore the techniques yet. And after working in one medium for such a long time, I appreciated the change for a bit. By the way, the video is not sponsored, but I did appreciate to get a free product, especially in this time, and it's really useful to have another set of paints around that I can experiment with. About this particular gouache set, it contains gouache paint in portable jelly cups. Each cup can be taken out of the original box, you can change the order of the paints, and you can replace the cups that have expired or you've already used up easily as well. So the whole package was a little hard to open on all sides, but this is due to security reasons so that the gouache doesn't dry out as quickly once you open it. And according to the attached information, you are supposed to use the paints within 6 months after you open them. That surprised me, honestly. I do not buy paints that I am supposed to just use up within 6 months because I expect from my paints to last for years. If I don't use them, they should just remain somewhere in my studio until I need them. But I'm sure that these paints won't actually go bad after 6 months. It's just a matter of drying out, because they did dry out already significantly more than they were once I opened them after 2 months. So yeah, that's something that I noticed. My solution to this drying out problem is a tiny little water sprinkler bottle that I use, and I try to re-wet the gouache every time I open the box, and even after I'm done with the study or painting, I sprinkle more water on top before I close the lid and then put the gouache away. To sum it up, the jelly cup packaging might look appealing, but it's not as practical as the tube gouache, which I prefer. I guess it's depending on who uses the gouache, because I also saw that this gouache is being used by kids, and in that case it is more accessible to them, and I can even imagine them using the gouache up within the first 6 months after it arrives. It is recommended to mix up the paint after you open it up for the first time, because there might be some extra glycerin sitting on top of the paint and you want it to be as smooth as possible before the first use. The gouache set contains 24 colors, and I did switch up the order a little bit, but I swatched them first on a piece of paper and made notes about the colors. Most of the choices were really nice and shiny. I was surprised how vibrant couple of those colors were. One was a bit strange and didn't even match the swatches on a flyer that came with the set of paints, and that was rose. I really missed the magenta type of paint that the flyer said the rose were supposed to look like, but other than this one mismatch, I was satisfied with the color choices. I managed to mix all the skin tones that I needed, and I even appreciate the light apricot color they included. It will really help you if you want the shortcut to creating skin tones, so you can use that as a base and adjust it according to your needs. By the way, this gouache paint set is only about 17 euros on Amazon, which is the cheapest of all the similar gouache sets that I came across. And the only other gouache set that I do have experience with is a kind of a high-end gouache by Schminke Horadam, which is artist grade, and it was significantly more expensive with less colors. I paid about 70 to 80 euros for it, and so there's a large difference in how the paint behaves. But I guess it wouldn't quite be fair to compare these two types of gouaches because they are meant for different things. So let me just talk about how I like this particular gouache, and I think 17 euros is a really wonderful price for such an amount of paint that you can use for experiments. And I will get to my conclusions later on, but for now I want to show you what I created. Before attempting the final illustration that I wanted to use for the review, I used the gouache just to try it out in my sketchbook to create a couple of thumbnails for larger paintings and to test out the limits of the paint, because there's nothing more frustrating than creating a detailed sketch in a larger format and then messing it up just because you're not used to the medium yet. I really prefer to just practice a bit with no pressure inside the sketchbook and then move on to the larger piece once you feel like you've already acquainted yourself with the paints. I always thought that the main difference between gouache and watercolor is that gouache needs to be used thick and watercolor is very thin, which makes it so transparent and flowy and really nice. But actually gouache can also be watered down and used as a transparent wash, which I tried to utilize in my illustration. It doesn't get as flowy and nice as a watercolor because it's an opaque paint after all. But using the watered down gouache for the first layer of my illustration helped me to create a basis for the next more opaque layers. One thing that confused me in gouache is how to actually merge all the transitions between the tones and the colors, because it's very different than what I'm used to with watercolor. But after limiting myself to a very few colors and did not bother with transitions anymore, just used hard edges, the face kinda popped. And even though the style is very different from what you see in my watercolor portraits, it kind of worked. And of course that one doesn't figure out how a new painting medium works in one painting. I will need to paint a few dozens of portraits to figure out how the color needs to be placed so that it looks the way I need it to look. But the final result in gouache will always look different than watercolor, so that was not even my intention. My intention was to create something that would even remotely look like a face, and I think I managed to achieve that. Once the face was finished, I moved on to the outlines of the figure that I pre-sketched and then continued working in the background. And the background was a pure joy to paint, even with gouache. By the way, the two brush sets that I'm using were about 3 euros each. And that's one thing that I absolutely love about gouache, is that you can use any type of very cheap brushes that you can put your hands on and they will work, because the thicker paint doesn't mind them. And so I finally managed to utilize something that was lying around the studio for a long time but didn't have a use for it, because watercolor oftentimes needs much more delicate brushes, and I used round brushes as well as flat brushes for this illustration. Color mixing is what I find most challenging about gouache, and it is very different than in watercolor. If you are someone who is used to watercolor and then switching to gouache, then you know what I'm talking about. In gouache, you need to lighten everything with white gouache. So the white gouache is actually one paint that you will run out of very, very quickly. And the rest of the boxed paints that even this set includes are quite dark. So it might be a good idea to get an extra tube of white gouache, because you will really need much more than the box contains. trying to create the transitions between the colors that I used for the background elements was a lot of fun for me and not very stressful, not as stressful as the face. But I was very happy that I had already prepared the whole composition as well as the coloring beforehand on my iPad, because that was very useful. And even with having the thumbnail already prepared, it took me nearly 4 hours to complete this. And by the way, the format of the illustrations is around A3 size. I am not yet sure how the gouache reacts to different surfaces. For example, what really interests me is to know if I will get a different result with an opaque color on a smooth surface than on a textured surface. But for now, I stick with something that I already know and what I'm used to, and that's Fabriano cold pressed paper, which is what I used for this painting. And it was a cotton paper, and in my opinion, the gouache sits very well on a textured paper. And my conclusion is that I love this set. I already mentioned that I won't compare it to my artistic gouache by Schminke, which has a different feel, even more so after the painting is done. The way the painting looks is very different, but that's not the point. I really like the freedom that this gouache set gave me to experiment. There was no pressure that I'm using expensive paint for practice that might and will not turn out the way you would want just because you are learning. And this is a very great value for the price that the company is offering with this set, I think. I was honestly surprised because while my experience with watercolor is that when you purchase a very cheap set of paints for students and then compare it to high-end artistic line of watercolor, the quality of the paint basically affects the way you need to work with it significantly. But with this gouache it wasn't like that. There is not much I need to do differently with the student grade gouache and the high-end artistic gouache. And so what I see as the biggest difference between the two is that the student grade does not have such a color vibrancy and does not have such opacity in white especially, and is not as light fast as a professional gouache gets. But other than that, it kind of behaves on the paper very similarly, and that's what I appreciate because it really lets me practice. Even with cheaper gouache, I can practice until I'm ready to create a finished, nice looking painting with my high-end gouache. So there goes my experience with gouache, and I really am grateful to Magicfly for sending this set over. It made me paint something different, something new, and I really had a fun time. Thank you, Magicfly. By the way, you can find this set on Amazon. I will link it down below. I'm not required to, but if you want to check it out, that's gonna make it easier for you. And thanks a lot for watching. Let me know your thoughts about gouache. Maybe you have experience with both mediums, watercolor and gouache. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye!